So before you do your take, I'm going to introduce the show. I'll introduce both of us, and then we'll cue Leonard to the slide, and then you'll do the first take. Let me see here. Oh, we are live. Right. Okay. Before you take, I'm going to introduce the show. Thank you for joining us today on KRTD News. Here with us today we have Eudice Gottsfield, former Conservative Party nominee for New York 17th Congressional District. She's going to be co-hosting today. This is going to be the schedule until we get back to March. So when we get to March, we're going to go back to the original schedule that I posted up. But thanks everybody for joining us today. We can start with our first story.
All right, so I guess I'll start on this one.
Yeah.
So I actually found this poll interesting, right? Because first of all, you kind of see that it was taken before and after the Capitol Mayhem, and I feel like a lot has changed in the country since then. Donald Trump and Pence, Trump Jr., they were kind of like the top three candidates that this poll has shown. I think since then, other people have moved up. Ted Cruz had his moment. Nikki Haley had his moment. I think Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is a good candidate and somebody that kind of would probably scale somewhere on here now. I think. So I think the Capitol Mayhem had a lot to do with Trump's ratings. I also think that kind of just as time goes on, kind of like the whole Hillary Clinton fiasco, I think a lot of people just don't like dynasties, and in America we're more like one and done. Served your time, and we really appreciate you for that. And we hope you've gained as well as we have. As a country, but I think as a country we're more one and done. We don't go for the king queen kind of thing. We don't go for the dynasties kind of thing. Trump Jr. I think that's kind of why you've seen Pence go up and Trump, the Trump family go down. I don't think it was as much as the Capitol Mayhem, right? Pence is one and the same with Trump. They had the same presidency and vice presidency together. So if it was really due to the Capitol Mayhem, they both have been blamed, as they were both fairly responsible. If you believe that they were responsible for it, they would have been responsible for it. But I think that these results, as much as people may want to say that they were due to the Capitol Mayhem, which is an argument in itself, but I think it's more due to the fact that Americans kind of just say, one and done. We appreciate you. You've had your chance to run. But we're kind of, we don't want to keep seeing you again.
Definitely agree with that. I think that you saw that a little bit during the Republican primary. Last time in the 2016 election, you saw Jeb Bush attempt to run, and people were kind of like, no, we're kind of done with the Bushes at this point. And then on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton, people were like, no, we're actually not going to go with another Clinton in the general. So it's kind of like America is not going to do dynasties anymore. We had the closest thing I think we had to a dynasty, though, would be the two Bushes, if I'm not mistaken, and possibly the Kennedy family. So
yeah.
Those are separate cases. You had and it doesn't even work just because you have the family name, as we saw with Jeb Bush, and even when we saw with Joe Kennedy running against Ed Markey, how pitiful that run was for him.
I think the family name can actually hurt you. And I think the media is kind of blowing this all up. And part of it, I think, is just because Trump is a story, right? Trump's always a story. He's always got something in the media, whether you like him or not, he's entertaining. And I think we can all kind of agree on that as a country. And so I think the media is just kind of trying to keep him alive. They're like, okay, Trump's gone. We want Trump gone. Now what? We don't have any more stories, so we're going to bring him back. But I think this is one of the things that times that the media is just trying to create a story out of something that's just not there. This is just something that America's known for. We don't like dynasties. We don't like family staying in power.
Exactly. And you're right, it does give the media something to talk about, because a lot of people I know on both the Democratic and Republican side said, well, I didn't watch the media at all, or the mainstream media rather, before Trump got elected. And then people I know on the Democratic side will say, well, I just started watching MSNBC only because Trump was elected, only because they were talking about Trump. So now that he's out of office, they're going to start losing a lot of viewers.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to, and even
Twitter, and I mean, I think, yes, they were hurt a lot because of their banning of Trump, and a lot of Republicans did leave because of that. But I also think the changing of the politics in the country, people were just like, Trump's not on, the politics is not entertainment anymore. We're not as interested. And, we'll go on to watch our YouTube videos and TikTok videos. And I think that's kind of more in the lines of Twitter had its, I think Trump really picked up Twitter. But I think it was just as a means of entertainment, not as a political forum, which it's kind of, I think, the way it is.
So let me ask you this. If Trump does not run for president or is unable to due to how the trial goes, who do you think will be the nominee for the Republicans in 2024?
I don't know. So I personally think Ron DeSantis would be a good nominee. I think, especially given as Florida is so purple politically, I think it's a good. You want to pick someone from there, Republican or Democrat. You don't want to pick someone from New York or California. It's just, as a Democrat candidate, it's too extreme. You come from such a Democrat area. Aren't exposed to that balance, that compromise that the country really needs, that understanding of both sides, right? You have to be able to understand both sides if you're in a purple area. And I think Florida's a purple area. Texas is kind of also, and I think that's why Ted Cruz may be getting such attention. I think, what's his name? Military guy who lost his eye.
Dan
Crenshaw. I think he can kind of be like a Pete Buttigieg, Republican side. And I think it would be good to run him. I also think Candace Owens, and I do think other women like Nikki Haley. But I think Candace Owens would also, even if she doesn't win, I think it would be a good idea for her to have a platform, right? Just to bring more diversity into the party, whether it's for Black America, as she talks about it, trying to influence and educate, Black America on the conservative side of politics, or whether it's just for everyone else in America, maybe some parts in America that don't grow up with such diversity, to see that diversity, female Black woman within the Republican Party running for president. I think she'd be a good candidate. I don't know if she'd win, but I think I'd say kind of in terms of a winning candidate, if the party can support Ron DeSantis or find another woman. I don't think Nikki Haley's strong enough, but I do think a woman, if maybe the party can pick her up to be really strong. But I would kind of go between DeSantis and Nikki Haley.
Definitely. I agree with that. Although I think that after the Trump era, the party is going to be done with running like a regular establishment type Republicans into an extent, like, because he kind of broke that barrier where for a long time you were just running the regular type of Republican.
I hope so. And as we go on to the next topics, I think this is something that kind of we'll talk about more, is the stagnation in both parties, where the people who have been in politics kind of have a hard time moving forward. And I think that's really hindered politics in our progression as a country on both sides. And so I really hope that, the people who were against Trump because he was more progressive than the Republican Party, I think they kind of, they've learned their lesson in the fact that Trump did get elected and did serve for 4 years. I think they learned their lesson and kind of step back a little bit and say, okay, maybe we don't have our finger on the pulse of the country, and let the more progressive people come along.
Definitely. If we could take a look at the next story, we're going to move on to another presidential poll. Now, these polls everybody keep in mind, these polls are still coming out. It's only 2021, and it's only the beginning of 2021. So both of these polls are subject to change throughout the next 4 years and all the way up until the next election. So I'm going to go to this. So because it's going to be a Democratic Party, since it's a Democratic poll, we're going to be looking at among Democratic correspondents, because among the general population won't really matter until you get to the general election. So kind of the way I'm going to take a look at this is, I think I'm just going to give my opinion first. I think most of these candidates are terrible. I don't think they I don't think they represent the party. I don't think a Joe Biden type candidate represents the party anymore. I only think he got elected because he made the argument that they basically buried any other candidate and kind of made the argument that he was going to be the guy to beat Trump. I don't think that's where the Democratic Party stands anymore. I think that he is in more of an old school style Democrat, like maybe from a different era. I don't think that's where the party is at right now. But
so why don't you think that any of these represent the party? Because obviously, being on the other side of the aisle, I would think that maybe some of these would.
Okay, so what I'm going to say here is the party base. At least 2/3 of the base was with not 2/3, at least a third or more of the base. I think the younger generations of the Democratic Party were the Bernie Sanders type supporters, and if you look at the numbers, mostly everybody 45 and under voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries if they voted. And I think the party is moving because in 4 more years, it's going to be everybody 49 and under. So that's going to increase that demographic. And I think that demographic is going to be taking over the party in the next couple of years. I don't think Andrew Cuomo is going to be a good nominee. The media will give him a lot of good press. They'll say he handled COVID well, but the truth is, I'm in New York. In the first 6 months, he really botched it. With the nursing home deaths, and he's extremely corrupt. He's terrible on the MTA. He is not the ideal governor, and I do think he's a target-rich environment for attack if he were to run for president. I think there's a lot that you could get him on in a primary debate, whether it's the nursing home deaths, how he handled the MTA, whether it's just the thing is he knows how to talk. He knows how to talk, but that's all he really knows how to do. When it actually comes to doing things, he can be a little bit ineffective. He's has executive powers for so long, and he's done. I can't even keep track of what he's done at this point. So someone would have to go dig through that. As for Kamala Harris,
I think he's kind of like also a little bit like Bloomberg. I see them in one as the same candidate. Them if Bloomberg had no chance, I can't imagine Cuomo having a chance.
No, exactly. Cuomo, the media boosted him, so everybody thinks he's doing a great job because MSNBC and CNN, and him going on and playing with his brother Chris.
And he will have that. Chris will be there, right? So he will have his brother's support, but I just don't think that's enough. I think he will come across as a Bloomberg, and the rest of the country won't like him for that.
I think Kamala Harris I don't like Kamala Harris personally, but because of how the cycle normally will go with vice presidents, I think that I hate to say, but if I had to take a guess right now, I don't think she's a good nominee. I think she has a lot of baggage coming with her, but I think Kamala Harris would likely be the next nominee because I don't think the Bernie Sanders left can arrange another candidate in the next 4 years. Bernie's not going to run again. I don't think that there's another candidate. Warren has kind of lost some of her trust with the left. I don't think there's another candidate that can take his place and fill that gap. And if there's no competition really in the primary, because everybody's going to be like, we have to make way for Kamala because she was the VP. You can't run against her. She was the VP. It's her turn.
But isn't that kind of undemocratic, right? I mean,
it is undemocratic.
The party to basically say that we're choosing the candidate. I mean, doesn't that enrage the party that they can't choose the people?
Oh, it does.
Candidate.
And we see this all the time. A lot of people don't talk about this. The mainstream media will not talk about this, but before Super Tuesday, Barack Obama made phone calls to Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Beto O'Rourke, and got that. And essentially, as soon as he made those phone calls, they dropped out and endorsed Joe Biden. So the Democratic Party plays a lot of dirty tricks with their primaries. If there's a candidate that looks like they're ramming through, Bernie won the first 4 states, I'm sorry, he's not going to be allowed to be the nominee. On the Republican side, I think you see less of that. If somebody, they actually let Trump go through.
The party didn't want Trump. The party did not want Trump.
The party didn't want Trump, but they allowed him to go through.
But and he won.
The Democratic side didn't want Bernie, so they didn't allow him to go through. They played all the games they can, and that's the thing you'll see on the Democratic side. When there's a candidate they do not want to go through, they will play games, they will use tricks, they will do whatever it takes to stop that candidate from coming through. There's so much stuff they will do. So I think that Kamala Harris is going to be the next nominee only because she was Biden's VP. I don't think Biden running a second time. He's like 80 now or something. No, he's not running again. But the thing is, and it always happens, like when Obama was president, he ran a primary. He ran uncontested the second time. Everybody said, we have to make way for the beloved Obama. I think that in a primary, you need to actually have competition. I think it's fair to have competition. I mean, they weren't strong competition, but I think there were 3 or 4 smaller Republicans running against Trump. They were still there. They didn't gain any traction, but you still had a primary challenge of some kind. I don't think it's fair for any president to run without any kind of primary challenge available to them. I think once you've been president, you need to prove it once again that you should be president again before they just let you go through. I think it's extremely undemocratic.
I actually do see, as a conservative, I do see the value in the far left fraction of the Democratic Party coming in, whatever it's called, and kind of breaking up trying to take out the negative from the Democratic Party. I do see value in that, as much as, I don't support a lot of their policies and visions, and more so policies, but I do see the value in them coming into the Democratic Party and kind of just making things more fair, on both sides. That should be happening.
Exactly. The thing is, if the people are choosing a candidate, you should not have these tricks going on behind the scenes in order to do anything. That's ridiculous. It's undemocratic, and you should. But I think we're going to see a lot of that. But let's go on to the next story. We're going to take a look at this video. Independent media has been attacked a lot lately. So,
YouTube did a new giant crackdown on independent media. This is really upsetting thing. I don't know what has happened since this occurred. So this happened like last week. I don't know how it's been ameliorated. I think some people have gotten it fixed, but others haven't. So let me show you some of the details here. YouTube has demonetized Graham Elwood, the Progressive Soapbox, the Convo Couch, and Ford Fisher for entirely unspecified reasons. The appeals process is entirely opaque and unaccountable. They could be left demonetized for months or forever with no explanation. Some more examples. There's another channel by the name of Frank Analysis. They were demonetized. Jordan Chariton had, the video pulled that we talked about. He had a journalist on the ground at the attempted insurrection, and the guy simply recorded everything going on around him, and that video was pulled. And they pulled it because they said, oh, this is spreading misinformation or whatever. It was literally just documentary footage. So, now again, this happened like a week ago. So I don't know. Some of them I think have gotten their monetization back. Some of them haven't. Some channels were just flat out pulled. But either way, here we go again. Now this stuff tends to happen in waves. But when the waves hit, holy shit. This reminds me of the original Adpocalypse, as it was called. Where overnight, my channel, David Pakman's channel, so many channels that YouTube just shut it all down for news and politics, and we were fully demonetized in the blink of an eye. Man, it was terrifying. And it was at that time we created the Patreon account, and I said, I don't trust these guys. I'm never going to trust them again. So if you support the show, help a brother out and pay $1 or $2 per month on Patreon, because, this is incredibly scary overnight to be completely defunded. Well, now others have experienced that exact same thing that I experienced, whatever it was, 2017, was it? 2018, something like that. You can't trust YouTube. You can't trust YouTube. And again, as was pointed out here, there's no process. There's no clear rules. There's no reasonable interpretation of the rules. Just like with the Jordan Chariton example, They're not even following their own fucking rules. I don't know, you're promoting conspiracies. He was just recording what was happening. You know, listen, some of these guys, I know Jamal Thomas, the Progressive Soapbox. I don't know the size of his channel. I think he probably at 30,000, 50,000 subs, something along those lines. Don't quote me on that. I'm just guessing and going based off memory here, but that's a decent sized channel. And the guy does a lot of good work. And just woke up and rug was pulled out from underneath him. Graham Elwood. That's another guy whose work I'm familiar with. I think he's a little bit newer to the, lefty talk scene compared to most of the other people who are on the scene, but just overnight, boom, it totally demonetized. They don't give him a reason. They don't... Listen, be careful what you wish for. Everybody who's cheering on censorship, everybody who's cheering on deplatforming, everybody who's cool with the algorithms that screw the little guy, here we are. Here we are. And it's getting better for the big guys and worse for the little guys. I mean, how many times have I told the story about how in the 2016 election, the algorithm was treating us pretty fairly, and we doubled the size of the channel. You could watch a CNN video and get recommended a secular talk video. Now we're deprioritized, and we don't get recommended nearly as much. So if you already watch the show, you'll get recommended videos. But if you're a new person, it's almost impossible to come across a secular talk video. It is incredibly hard. And they don't admit this part. YouTube doesn't, but I'm convinced there's a tier system for everything. There's a tier system for how the algorithm treats you. There's a tier system for monetization. And they really are creating this hierarchy where at the top are the outlets that get shit wrong all the time. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, zero accountability for them. They could push conspiracies all day long like Russiagate. No accountability whatsoever. They get away with everything. They're just viewed as the gold standard. And then the smaller you go and the more independent you go, the more they get screwed by the system. And this is another example. Happened all at once. All at once this happened. Demonetizing some people who are doing good work. Plenty of people here doing some good work. Ford Fisher, by the way, is just another person who's just a on-the-ground documentarian, if you will, following extremist groups. They couldn't differentiate between being an extremist and advocating for...
We got the gist of it. You want to go ahead and respond, and then I'll respond when you're done.
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic because like we were talking about before, it's one of those topics where Republicans and Democrats really both agree with it and have a stance with it. And when legislation was going through Congress, it was one of those things that everybody expected to have bipartisan support. And I think it's one of those things where we ended up seeing it's the way they approach it. This is a very technical issue, right? We all have complaints about it. We can all lament about it. But it's one of those, it's a really technical issue, right? Because you have the antitrust laws with Ford that came forth, and it was never really about, it was always about protecting the consumer at the end of the day, right? The monopoly, the purpose of it was you actually had to do an evaluation and it was basically an economic evaluation to see if it harmed the user, right? And so the idea of it was that if you had a monopoly and you were charging somebody more for your product than they would otherwise get if there was a reasonable market competition, that wouldn't be allowed. So that was the gist of it. Obviously, there's more technicalities to it, but what ended up happening was when you have the internet, now things are free. And how you can't really place an economic value on that. And I think it's more also a matter of, I think we have to change the definition of harm from an economic harm. And that's very, very difficult because, right, you can't really put feelings into that. Well, I'm feeling hurt. There has to be proof. And that's something within our federal system. If you want to bring something, create policy, it has to be evidence-based, your solution that you're going on. So there has to be proof that this is somehow hurting people unconstitutionally. And I think it's a issue, but I think it's one of those issues that, first of all, I think both parties are just taking it from the wrong angle. Every solution I've seen from Republicans and Democrats side really isn't that promising. But I think it's one of those, it's one of those problems that you really need to take as this is basically it's more of a technical issue, and you have to be able to first define a system in where in where you're able to catch these people. And I actually read something recently that said that it's probably not, the legislation on this level is probably not going to come from Congress or the Congress, the Senate, the House. It's probably going to come from the investigations, kind of on the under that. So it's basically just it's one of those things that I think it has to be more defined technically, and I think the complaints, the way we approach it has to be from the who's it hurting, right? So we can say that it's hurting the advertisers, it's hurting the businesses that are trying to come in and advertise and sell their product and get their product seen, more so than it's really hurting the American individual public, because we're not paying anything to see these things, and our post, our single post not being seen isn't really such a big deal. But it's the idea of possibly advertising, having to pay more to advertise with them than you would have to otherwise. I think it's taking a different approach, and the harm that we'd actually have to end up proving is probably going to have to come from the business side rather than the public side, which is probably why it won't come from politics, because politics gets the votes from the public, not necessarily from individual businesses.
Yeah, and I would hate to be in that position. Like, we're not monetized yet, but recently our video got flagged as QAnon. 2 of our videos actually got flagged as QAnon, and it cited Wikipedia as a source for what QAnon is, and then it also cited that it basically just said that it's basically trying to say our video is not legitimate. The person who I did that video with did extensive research on voter demographics. They did extensive research on everything. And then YouTube says, well, you're not legitimate. I don't think YouTube should be able to make that decision. The thing is, I'm not sure if you want to, but during the Iraq War, there was a lot of contested stuff about anti-war voices and stuff like that. MSNBC took a lot of people off the air. CNN, Fox News, they would not let people on the air who were against that war. So if I were in the year, I think that was the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken, the Iraq War. So if I was in the year that happened, and I made a video, if YouTube was a thing, and I made a video saying, I disagree with the Iraq War for A, B, and C, and I gave facts and I gave my evidence, YouTube would say, if they have their current algorithm, YouTube would say, this is not legitimate, and then they'd put a thing under it that says, please check MSNBC.
Right. Yeah, I think that also it's, when it comes to censoring, it's something that, like he said, it's something that Republicans have been screaming about, and then, when Democrats kind of face it themselves, I think it's just something that is one of those things that you have to look at. What if it happened to me, right? I may benefit from this, but anything good always has another side to it. And the question is, what if that happened to me? What if they did that to me? Would that be okay? Because there's definitely a possibility that they can do that to me. If they can do that to any other individual, they can do that to me. And would that be okay? And that's where we come back to the Constitution, where it's equal rights for everyone. Because if it happened to you, you wouldn't like it either. But I think it's kind of a matter of, are these public forums or are they not, right? If they're public forums, we should be allowed to post whatever we want there. If it's not a public forum, then we're going to the part of, well, then Facebook, you have to be responsible for what's posted on there, right? But they're not. They're not technically responsible for everything that's posted on there. We're considered, I believe, I forgot the format of it, right? But if I'm an editor on my, Facebook page, Facebook isn't necessarily technically responsible, although they are taking responsibility. So either they're public or they're not. And I think they have to decide that. And I think, like Facebook said, it might necessarily it might be nearly impossible to moderate everything, but then you have to treat it as a public platform and let anyone talk and say whatever they want.
No, I'm actually in favor of a system. This is something that has not been talked about too much, but where you would make it so Facebook, Twitter, and all the other social medias become the public square, where the First Amendment right will apply there, because
and you still have the idea of right, and you still have the Constitution and the American law in place, right? Like, you can't engage in harassment. There's still certain things that that are not allowed, right? They're not allowed in person. They're not allowed on social media platforms. They're still not allowed, even if it's a public platform, right? You can't call for some people to kill someone. There's just certain things that you can't do, according to our legal system, and that will stand, and that will protect Americans to the degree that we believe should be.
The thing, yeah, definitely. And the way I would do it is, if everybody's allowed to say whatever they want, and none of this, please check MSNBC, please check CNN, please check Fox News, please check A, B, or C. No, don't put that under my tweet, please, or put that under my legitimate reason for somebody to be removed. They should be entitled to a public hearing where they're able to do this publicly. You should not be able to just behind closed doors. These CEOs are not even the algorithm decides who gets room. That should not be how it is, because that's not fair. The person does not have a chance to appeal it. The person does not have a chance to defend themselves. Maybe the algorithm is wrong and you just remove the channel for no reason.
Right.
In some cases.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. It's a good point.
No, let's take a look at the next story.
Jenna, YouTube.
Should I start in this one?
I'll start on this one and then please start on the last two. So this is the baby bonds bill. Normally, I don't like Senator Cory Booker. I actually supported the Green Party candidate on this show several times, gave them a lot of airtime, about 5 or 6 episodes. So I was really not really a fan of Cory Booker. I don't think he's so great. But
I will have to. I've heard a couple things that I'm not too fond of. As a person with integrity, I don't see that there.
I don't mind Ayanna Pressley. She's more progressive left, so I agree with her a little bit more. A few problems with some of the ways she does things, but other than that, not too much of a problem. But this is an interesting bill. I believe he's brought it up before. I don't think with Ayanna Pressley, but yeah.
I think he brought it up in his race for president.
Oh, he brought it up in his race for president. Yeah, that didn't gain that much traction, but yeah, I actually forgot about him. But yeah, so according to Politico, what the bill will do is, under the baby bond bill program, the federal government would open a $1,000 savings account for every American child at birth. So that means, let's be clear, nobody who's already, who's been born already would qualify for this program. So anybody out there hoping this passes and you get some money, I'm sorry. But yeah, so this would give $1,000 to every American child at birth, and additional deposits of about $2,000 a year. I think this, if I remember reading, this bill would cost about $60 billion a year. I remember reading that somewhere. So recipients could begin making withdrawals when they turn 18. I actually don't have too much of a problem with this bill. My issue is more our third bullet point. My issue is the regulation on this bill. I don't think my issue here is that it could be some of the things I've read that could be used for going to college, buying a house, or starting a business. First of all, not every American wants to go to college. What if I wanted to go to trade school and they say, I'm sorry, if I go to the account, let's say I was born that year and I go to the account, I want to make a withdrawal. I'll say, I would like to go to the trade school of Connecticut. I'm sorry, we don't recognize trade school as something that you could do. We think you should go to college. What if I don't want to go to college? That's one of the problems I have with this bill. It forces you to say you have to go to college or buy a house or start a business. I actually don't have too much of a problem with this thing. I think it could actually help people start up when they turn 18 and things like that. But I think that they should be able to take the money and just take the money. I don't think it should say, well, you have to do A, B, or C. That's my big problem with the bill. I do think it can be very effective, but in certain ways.
Okay, I'm
I
hugely
would
not
exclude
against this
the
bill.
rich.
I think this bill is superfluous, completely ridiculous. But first of all, why are we giving everyone $1,000? Right? You really think Mark Zuckerberg's newborn child needs $1,000? I mean, why is every child getting $1,000? Right? Your purpose is to lift the poor from poverty, right? Giving every child $1,000, and I think is ridiculous. Also, and I understand that trying to push forth the idea of equity, but basically you're taking someone's money and let's say you're taking 100% of their money, right? You're taking $2,000 from Mark Zuckerberg's or $1,800 from Mark Zuckerberg account, and you're giving him back $1,000, right? I mean, he might as well just have kept that $1,800 or $2,000. So for the sake,
I don't know the specific. I don't know the specifics of the bill, but the only I would actually agree with you on that. Sure.
Every redistribution program is somebody's, right? You go to a bank, right? You give them money, they give you back money. Who's paying for that teller? Like, somebody is paying for that teller. So why doesn't everybody just keep their own money and not have the government tell you if you can spend it on housing or spend it on food stamps or spend it on whatever? Just keep your own money and not have the government get in between, so the government can now pocket all the money. That's what redistribution programs are, right? I'm not against helping the poor. I mean, I just helped out in a homeless shelter this week. I'm all for charity and helping out the poor. I'm definitely I believe that we should all be looking forth, trying to give back to our country and to our planet as much as possible while we're here. But I think the redistribution programs are all wrong. I don't understand, and I'd love for if you can explain how giving money to the government to then give back to someone and take a chunk of it is good. Why doesn't, if anything, have me give my charity directly to the New York Cares program, right? That the New York Cares program who helps so many people in New York City in need, right? Have me give my money there. Tell me that I will, however, I get a tax deduction if I do that. Have me give my money there instead of giving it to the government so that the government can take a check off it.
Well, I would actually agree with you on some of those points. I would do the bill in a little bit of a different manner. First of all, I would exclude Mark Zuckerberg's newborn child. First of all, I don't think they need $1,000. Secondly, I would actually look at government programs that can take some cuts, and I would cut those programs in order to pay for this. So I'm not sure specifically which ones would be cut, but I think there are some programs that could be bloated, or maybe some programs that just aren't being used as much anymore. And you could say if it costs $60 billion a year, let's say we take $2 billion from this program, $5 billion from this program, 10 from this, then you can do that. You could do money reallocation. And in that way, we would not have to raise taxes on anybody. We could exclude anybody making, let's say, over $400,000 a year or something like that. And the program could be done in a more effective way. I think that the bill is definitely a little bit sloppy in its wording. And I think it could work under certain terms. I don't think the current terms are good. So.
Yeah, I just think redistribution programs are wrong to begin with. Although Trump did actually raise the amount of money that a family gets back for children, and I think that's something that just hasn't been mentioned that much in media. But Trump actually did raise the amount of tax deductions that a family can take for their child. So I think it was raised to now like $2,000 or something. Families actually can get back more money for their children. But I think it's just a more equitable way, just a more logical way of basically saying you can keep your money if you have your kid. We understand that you now have more expenses, and so we won't charge you as much taxes. And I think that's much smarter than saying, give us your money, we'll take a chunk of it for ourselves, and then give you back part of it.
I see some merit to that. All right, let's go on to the next story. Let's go on to the next story, I think. We're going to cover environmental story. You can go ahead and start on this one.
Yeah, so the Keystone pipeline, and I think there's also the Dakota Johnson pipeline that they're talking about now. The lawyer for the Dakota Johnson pipeline, actually, I think today was in the news that he stepped down, but I think it was because of a different case he was a part of through the Trump campaign, and not necessarily because of the pipeline. But that's been news lately, and it's actually funny. So when you look at the Keystone pipeline and this Dakota pipeline, it's, if you see who's pushing it, really, right? I think the public only found out about it from the media and from the celebrities who were pushing it, but it was really the celebrities and the wealthy, right? The top 1% that was pushing it. And you kind of think, like, this isn't something that's grassroots, right? This isn't something that's coming from I personally don't think this is something, if the public knew about it, and I think that's why it's not grassroots. I think this is something that if the public knew about, it wouldn't become it wouldn't become a big deal, and they wouldn't necessarily support it. I am an environmental engineer, and I do believe in a cleaner environment, and I think that's something we should all strive for, and always work towards. But in this sense, I actually, from what I've seen, and from what I know regarding environmental engineering, I think this will actually increase emissions as well as increase the costs for Americans. So I know a lot of the Republican side is talking about jobs, and losing jobs is horrible. And it's something that, families are now struggling with because they lost jobs. But I think there's also more to that. I think, first of all, gas prices, right? Gas prices will rise. All it's doing is that pipeline where they send gas through, that lowers the expense of what they can send of transportation of gas, right? If they can't send it through a pipeline, they will have to send it through trucks and tanks, things like that. Those create a lot of emissions. Whenever you're doing LCA life cycle analysis, you always look at emissions, and you never ever want to use as much as you can. You never want to use trucks, trucks or car transportations. You want to use that as least as infrequently as possible, because they just emit so much. And so that's basically, if you take out a pipeline which doesn't have as much emissions as transporting something through trucks and vehicles do, and it's not as expensive, right? Have you seen the gas prices lately? We're almost double what it was when Trump was president. When Trump was president, I think the average price of gas was like $1.75, and now it's like $2.50. It's insane. And I think the idea of closing down the pipeline, the idea of helping the environment is always a good thing. But the thought process behind closing down a pipeline, it didn't come from the public. This isn't something that I think the public would really support if they knew it was involved in it. And I think the 1%, which does this so much, they try to tell the public what the good is, who they should vote for. They're not affected by that 175 to 250 of gas prices. And a lot of people in New York City and LA wouldn't be either, because we don't, travel with cars as much, but people outside do. And it really affects things. And, especially when you travel a lot for your work, and when you come out, the prices are going to be astronomical. And I mean, I don't see this being a good idea. I don't think it was well thought through. I think it should not have been an executive order. I think it should have got through a little more thought process than it seems to have.
I'm to the point where I am 100%. I need to see the slideshow again. I know you put that down. I need to see my last point. But one of the things is here that I was most concerned about. I was really concerned definitely about the environmental effects. But one of the things I've been concerned about is something that in America we always ignore. We always ignore what the Native Americans have to say. And the Native Americans were saying, please don't build this pipeline. It encroaches on our land. We have treaties with the Native Americans, which we ignore day after day. We made deals with them years ago, and we don't honor any of those agreements. So when they when they ask for somebody to talk to from the government, we're going to send if we send anybody, it'll be some very low official who won't be able to have any power or anything. So if they have a problem with something, we should at least hear them out, and they should not be ignored. We have a treaty with them that says this would go through their land. This would go through their water supply, I believe. These are Native American areas. We should not be allowed to go encroach on there. How would we like it if the Algonquin tribe, for example, said, we're going to build a pipeline through Connecticut? And That's kind of how I'm looking at it right now. I do see the environmental harm of it, but I also see the fact that we're encroaching on Native Americans again. It's something this country has a history of doing.
That's true. That's true. And I would faster side with you on the Native Americans than the environmental impact. I don't see the environmental impact. I do agree that there is an environmental impact to the Keystone pipeline, but I think taking it away is more harmful to the environment. And definitely we want to decrease our reliance on carbon fuels and decrease our carbon emissions into the atmosphere. But I think it has to be done in a smart way, right? As we see, if you take away the pipeline, it's not taking away our reliance on oil. It's just taking away our access to oil. And so prices have to go up. If you want to decrease our reliance on oil, you have to increase the technologies that can substitute oil so that we're less reliant on oil. And that's, increasing the renewable research. And that's really, honestly, we need a lot more research. There's so much opportunity now in the research field. I think we need a lot more research to just thrust forward the technology that we have, the renewable technology, and really get it going. But the Native American tribes is an interesting point. And it's one of those things where I think there are certain times where I will say this. There are certain times within, I worked in the New York State Department of Environmental Planning. So this is what we did. And there were times when you wanted to and you needed to build through a certain federal area or, an area that body of water that belonged to or fish in there. You can't just, you can't kill fish just to get what you want. And so, there's obviously regulation there. Many times you would have to build, if you were going to destroy a body of water, you would have to reinstate a body of water somewhere else to make up for that, right? So there's a habitat you destroyed, you'd have to make up for it somewhere else. And so to kind of keep the ecosystem and everything going together, and just because that's the right thing to do. So I think it's one of those instances where there's always that opportunity to say, well, maybe we can give you a body of water somewhere else. But I do think it's something that's also, you have to take into account that this is their land and you can't kick someone out of their land. And, you can't just come into my house and say, I'm kicking you out of your house because I want to build a pipeline through it. I think you have to work around it. And you can't, if that's my body of water, if that's where we get our drinking source from, you have to work around it. So I think instead of stopping it, I think it should be more compromise instead of executive order, right? Build around it. The pipeline has its benefits, and that is the truth. I don't think we should build through or take away from the Native American land. And I completely agree with you that they've really, really been mistreated. And I'm actually really happy to see on social media, whether it's Instagram or TikTok, there's so many Native Americans coming out. I don't know if you've seen it too, but they've been celebrating their culture. And I think that's beautiful. And I'm really happy to see that. I think that's amazing. And but I think that taking away from their land is wrong. But I think that maybe the company will have to incur an increase in costs to go around it. Find another body of water, get water from somewhere else. I think there has to be more negotiations. There's so much information and things we can do nowadays. There's so much that we have at our disposal, at our hands. And I think we need to tune into that instead of tuning things out, right? Instead of this whole cancel culture. And I know I'm a Gen Z, I'm a part of that, generation, whether I personally don't believe in canceling anyone, but, I'm still a part of that generation. I think that instead of canceling things and shutting people out, within government, right? Within your personal life, I would say if somebody's coming into your personal space and telling you something that you don't want to hear, you have every right to shut them out. And, that doesn't mean hurt them in any way. That just means turn off the phone, turn off the TV, walk away from them if they approached you. You have absolutely no obligation to listen to anyone you don't agree with. It might be good for you to, but you don't have an obligation to. But I think within politics, we really need, you're not out for yourself anymore. You're representing a group of people, and that group may be purple, right? That group may have red and blue and Republican and Democrat in it. And you have to hear both sides because that's your job. Your job is basically a negotiator, and you have to hear both sides of things. And I think that there has to be more finding better solutions and not just taking one stance in standing on that and going forward, because we're never going to move forward as a country like that.
I agree with you. And I do think this is not the first time with the Native Americans that we've done this. And what we've also made a habit of doing is when they were planning this pipeline, there were no Native Americans. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say there was no Native American representatives from those tribal leaderships at the table when they were talking about going through that land. I don't think they were invited there. And I think it would be a common thing.
I don't know about that. Right. But that would be horrible if that was the case. They do have lawyers, and I know there's all throughout the country, a lot of land that has been theirs is being fought for, whether it's being fought for back or being fought for to get some compensation for, that's going on throughout the country. And it's kind of below our radar, which is probably best for them. But there's definitely that going on, throughout the country. And if they were deserving of something and we've taken that away from them, I think that should be given back to them. And it was definitely wrong of us for doing so.
No, exactly. And I talked to some people who were like extremely in favor of this specific pipeline project. I don't know whether they were in favor of, changing it and anything, but they said the way we should go about this is we should plow through the Native Americans' land and we should give them another place to live. But the problem with that is we've done that how many times now? We've said to them, can you please move? Can you move? We had the Trail of Tears. We had all this stuff. So I think there's a time we tell them to move enough.
And it's like one of those times. It's like the same thing we said before when you have the internet, right? When it comes to social media, banning people. And they do it to Republicans. And when they do it to Republicans, everybody starts going around saying, the Democrats are like, oh, yeah, that's great. And, and I'm not blaming Democrats here. I'm saying Republicans may very well do that same thing, too, if roles were reversed. But in this case, the Republicans were banned and the Democrats were agreeing and going forth with it. And then when the Democrats were banned, it was like, hold up, wait, we can do that, right? Like what happens to you can happen to me, too. And I think that's kind of what we're missing here, where with the Native Americans' land, you can't go through someone's land, right? Imagine if it was you. And that's really kind of the context that I put everything in. Imagine if it was you, right? Imagine if that was happening to you. Imagine if someone came into your house and said, we are going through your house. We're going through your water source. We're going through your backyard, right? You wouldn't want that. First of all, the radiation, the toxic chemicals that you can get from that, not so much radiation, more toxic chemicals, in this case with the pipelines, the noise, the pollution. I mean, there is going to be an increase in negative effects in your environment that you may not want. And so I think anyone telling you, sometimes you can't help if somebody built something nearby, but going through your land, dirtying your water, you made an investment on your house when you moved there, and you made that investment under certain beliefs and understandings that would happen to you, right? Can someone come in and destroy the land next door? Yes, but is it right? No. And I think it's one of those things that it's just not right? Whether they could, whether they can't, whether they can get away with it in a court, whether they can't get away with it in court, it's just not right. I wouldn't want someone to do that to me. And I don't think we should do that to Native Americans.
And I think that's the part of the story a lot of people have been overlooking. A lot of people will talk about, in the argument I've seen in the media when people will talk about this story is always the environmental argument. Nobody will ever bring up the Native American argument at all. Like people say, this is bad for the environment. And then the next guy will say, well, yeah, so what? Or they'll say it's bad for the environment, or it's not as bad as you would think. But that's the arguments we're seeing in the media when people talk about these pipelines. And we're not taking into consideration the Native American factor. I think that's something that this country needs to do a little bit more.
I mean, even it's interesting, you talk about Native Americans when you have what is it called now? The Governor Cuomo Bridge, the Mayor Cuomo Bridge. Bridge, right? It was between Rockland County and Westchester County, two counties that I grew up between. And it was always the Tappan Zee Bridge, and Tappan Zee was named after the tribe that was there before we came. Right? That was the tribe, that was the land. And that was what the bridge was named after. So whether people knew that or not, it was there, and their family can come down and tell their stories to their grandkids, and hopefully we take the time out to learn that. But it was one of those things where, changing the name to Mario Cuomo is kind of, it was a real diss at that. And I think a lot of people were, when they heard about it on both sides, were just same thing we're saying. It's just wrong. It's wrong. We've done them so much harm. Why continue it? From both sides of the aisle, residents were saying it's wrong.
That's another thing. I think it was Andrew Cuomo who did that, correct?
Yeah.
So that's another thing. If Cuomo runs for president, you could attack him on. It's always fun.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot. And I don't see Cuomo doing it. I think his ratings have gone terribly down. I think Cuomo was he had a great time, right? And you always have that. You always have people who have their moments, and some people have sustaining moments, and you always have those people who just have their moments. There have been so many people that we've forgotten about, who have had their few months in the spotlight and have kind of dwindled because of that. After that, I think Cuomo did that. I think he was maybe possibly a little bit arrogant to write a book about leadership, too soon into that. I think, I don't know if he thought he was fooling everyone or what, but I think it was a little bit arrogant of him. But I think he had his moment, and I just don't see, even from New York. Also, it's actually interesting because being in New York, I think Andrew Yang has announced that he's running for mayor.
Yeah.
If you heard that. So that could be interesting. If he takes the mayor position, I don't know if he would, personally, I don't think it would be right of him to jump, from mayor to president. I don't think he'd win. I think the public would look at that like, you're just going after one thing. You weren't.
We saw how when de Blasio and when Giuliani and some of the other former mayors run for president, how they actually do.
That's true. Right. And that's what I was going to say afterwards. I was going to say, Andrew Yang, if he becomes mayor, I think it's too soon for him to run for president. He needs to first build up a reputation and a resume before he moves up. But I also think it's just not the position. We are too Democrat in New York, especially in New York City. And I don't think as a New York City Democrat, you can really understand the Democrats in the rest of the country. I think having a Democrat from middle America, from somewhere a little bit more purple, is a good thing.
Yeah, almost, yeah. I do think definitely New York is very Democratic and very blue, and it's very difficult to win as Republican or as any other party if you run in New York.
Yeah,
I would say
I do think it shouldn't be
party for local seats. And sometimes I believe the Conservative Party also holds a couple local seats. I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I do think it's I do think it's important though to not have so much establishment Republicans or Democrats. I think that kind of gets in the way of things sometimes, in the way of innovation, in the way of compromise, in the way of change. Just like we're all very keenly aware of who our president is and that we don't want the Clintons and the Bushes and the Trumps to stay in power. I think we also need to be a little bit more aware and aware of our Congress, the House and Senate, congressmen and congresswomen and senators to not stay in power too much for too long. And I think that's something that's, I don't know if as many people are aware of. I think more people are becoming aware of, but it's something that I kind of wish we do something about. Because I think it's just, there are people in there who have just been in there for too long. You can see it.
Definitely.
You can see it on their faces. You can see it in the way they act. They kind of build up a sense of arrogance and build up a sense of stagnation, where the progressive policies on both sides, right? I think progressive has become a bad word on the right. I don't think the definition of the word, is necessarily a bad word. We always want to progress forward, and fitting ourselves and our constitution into the state of current affairs. But I think from what I've seen, it seems to be extremely hard for the establishment to be able to do that and really respect the younger generation of people coming in, and holding and letting them in and holding them with the same esteem and the same regard as everyone else.
Definitely. So we're out of time. Thank you everyone for joining us on KRTD News. We will see. Next week, we have Joe Evans from the Libertarian Party co-hosting with us. We will see you again, Eudice, on the third week of March on Friday. Thank you so much for coming on today.